All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tati. I am a nanny in Boston, and I'm also the chair of the education committee. Today, we have Sue Downey here to talk about working with older children. And this is part of the Collective Expertise webinar series, which is brought to you by our very own members of the International Nanny Association. And as of this year, I'm very excited to say that they're all going to be open to the public. So everybody can actually register and participate on this webinar. So, whenever they come in, you can let your friends know and make sure that everybody signs up. So today we have Sue, who's going to talk about working with older kids. And here's the blurb that she sent us. So most nannies are very comfortable with toddler tantrums and infant sleep regressions, but once the kids get a bit older, it can be very frustrating. Yes. Taking back electronic addiction and just getting them out of the door to all of those activities can make a nanny feel overwhelmed and helpless. In this webinar, we will briefly discuss the developments of kids from 8 through the teen years and how knowing those development milestones can help us provide the best care of school-age kids. Then we will dive into some ideas to navigate the nanny-child-parent relationship that is unique to working with kids in the 8 to 18 ages. And last, we will problem solve some of your challenges and brainstorm ways to overcome those situations. So Sue Downey is currently a nanny for a 9-year-old who thinks she's 16 and a challenging 5-year-old who makes her laugh. She has worked with kids of all ages, including a few college kids who needed some help on the way to being fully adult. She went to college to be a high school communications teacher, but decided that it was a little too much like a real job. So she landed in the world of being a nanny. Most of Sue's jobs have been long-term placements lasting at least 3 to 4 years. She has been a camp counselor, youth group leader, car dancing instructor, and survived hair flipping, eye rolling, overreacting, and great deal of drama. Sue organizes Nannypalooza, and if you guys haven't been there, you should definitely attend, which is a conference for nannies and she also oversees the International Nanny Training Day. So, important notice that I need to say here. So all opinions and information given during an INA webinar are of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of the INA. But Sue is awesome. So thank you so much for joining us, Sue. It's really an honor to have you here with us tonight.
Oh, thank you. It's totally my pleasure. And this is a topic I really love talking about because I love working with older kids. I used to really be like in that zone with those like 3-year-old, 2-3-year-olds. That was my favorite. But I really think the more I get a chance to work with older kids, the more I see the joy in it. The pictures on the screen are one of our we have lots and lots of friends, my partner and I, who have kids, and we call it Camp Sue and Charlotte. And we tell the kids, if you can raise enough money to get a plane ticket here, you can come and stay with us anytime, for spring break and everything. And that's my friend Rachel, who came a couple of years, babysat and came to stay with us. We were in Baltimore having fun. So I really enjoy this age group and am always constantly learning more about working with them. So I'm excited. So really briefly, what we're gonna do is go into the development, we'll kind of zoom through it really fast. And because I think that a lot of times we are very adept as nannies of knowing the developmental milestones from birth, up to like kindergarten, but then some of the other developmental things, because they're not as concrete and specific, we sometimes don't know them. And so it's good to have a basic understanding of that developmental levels. Then talk a little bit about connections and cooperation and some challenging behaviors. And so that's just a little bit about where we're headed. But the first thing I want to say is that working with older kids as a nanny can be extremely challenging because when you're responsible for younger kids, you have a lot of control. Mom and dad leave and they don't have a lot of say about like what's going on specifically with every single incident through the day. Like the kid's not gonna, mom and dad aren't gonna come home, and the kid's not gonna go to them at 3 and say, well, she made me have a healthy snack, not this, or, you know, whatever. When the kids are older, they're talking to their parents more. They're up later at night. They spend a little more time with their parents, and they're communicating more with their parents, which is a good thing. That's what we want. But it means that now there's a lot more influence of the parents. You have a lot more times where parents are making discipline decisions or decisions about how the day is going to be structured or what activities you're going to and all of that. So one thing to keep in mind as we talk about this is sometimes you don't have the control the way that you would with a younger kid. And so you have to be a little more creative about your problem solving. And you also have to be very good when you're working with the older kids of remembering this sort of balance of parent versus nanny. You have to be on the same page. When kids are young, you can have one discipline style and the parents can have a different one, and it can still work because when the kids are with you, that's how it's working. When the kids are with the parents, it doesn't work so well with the older kids. You have to be more in sync. So that's something to just keep in mind as we talk about all of the stuff tonight, and we can try to solve some of those problems at the end. And also, if we don't have time to solve any of your problems, you can always contact me and I can help you problem solve, or at least try to, because I do enjoy thinking about these sort of things. So the common challenges with kids are, you know, talking back, chores, the parental involvement, tough questions, homework, the time management, all of these kinds of things. So I encourage you to think about what your challenges might be, if there's anything specific, and like I said, we'll try to problem solve some of those. So here we go, developmentally speaking. So there's a couple big themes across this area of development. A need for independence, a breaking away from their parents and other adults in a kid's life. And we're talking really about, I split it into two sort of big groups of older kids. There's this school-aged kids, sort of 6 or 8, depending on where you start, to about 11 or 12. That's sort of the younger version of these older kids. And then the second one is like 11, 12 to 18. And that's like older. Then there's still more, because really we know they don't stop developing until 25. But typically you're not working with kids that are 20. Although sometimes, but anyway, so across those ages, so we're talking, you know, 8 to 18-ish, these broad themes are there. Independence, identity, they want to know who they are. They're figuring out who they are apart from everybody else, what everyone else has told them that they are. And then social things. So if you think about it, it's the same basic themes as a toddler. If you're thinking about a 3-year-old, they want to be independent, they're trying to figure out who they are, and they're trying to learn how to work with others. It's the same basic themes. It just looks a little different. And because as a society, we're used to a 3-year-old saying, I want to do it, or, you know, telling you no, or all of those things, like that's sort of accepted societally. Like we figured out that that's how 3-year-olds are. But teenagers and these preteen kids, instead, somehow society has said, no, they're just problems. Like, oh, teenagers. Like nobody says, oh, teenagers, I love working with teenagers. Like you would say that with a 3-year-old. But the struggles are the same. They just look a little bit different. Mm-hmm. So from 8 to 12 years, there's some things that we know. Typically, 8 to 12-year-old kids have 5 best friends and 1 enemy. They define themselves outwardly, how they look, what they wear, what their activities are. They don't think about who they are at this age necessarily on the inside. They're separating from their parents and peers, and or they're separating from their parents, and peers and other adults become more important. So even though you don't have the same influence necessarily about a lot of the decisions as a nanny, your opinion is sometimes, at least, can become more important. It depends on if they see you as an extension of your parent of their parents, or if you're this other cool adult. And we'll talk about how you can be that other cool adult in a few minutes. Mood swings are more common. This is the beginning of puberty. So it used to be that puberty was more like 10, 11, 12, but statistics are now that a lot of kids can begin puberty at age 7. And those secondary sexual characteristics emerge. A lot of hormones can be surging, an increase in testosterone and other hormones. That also it comes with this keen awareness of their own body, and more, you might see more like tummy aches, and if they have a minor scrape that they maybe didn't pay attention to when they were like 4 and running into everything, it might be more of a big deal because they're more aware of their body as this part comes through. Girls can have a slow and steady rate of growth at this time too, like 3 to 4 inches a year, typically, but boys can be a little bit slower behind that curve and tend to grow in spurts. That growth can make them a little uncoordinated with their bodies. But the good news is they're often more interested in sports and team activities at this age, which helps with some of that. So at 8 to 12 years, they can see the consequences of what's happening, and they get the meaning of right and wrong, but they might not necessarily take the time to sort of think about it. The kids in this age range, especially like I think 9, 10, 11-year-olds, they're very specifically leaning on the rules. There's a big sense of justice at this age, like what's right and what's fair. They may want to renegotiate the rules as they get older, so because they see that sometimes the rules don't seem just to them, but they like that sense of rule following, and they can start to understand societal roles like that different people play, a caretaker, a helper, people who are negative, those kinds of things. They're aware of some of that. They have a great deal of need for same-sex friendships and want to feel like they're part of a group. So 6 to 8-year-olds can sit developmentally. This is important. 6 to 8-year-olds can sit for about 15 to 20 minutes at a time. But we put them in school and ask them to sit for 40 minutes at a time a lot of times. Like if you go to a math class, they're usually, at least a half an hour of a lesson, and they're asked to sit for that amount of time. So this can be a huge stressor for kids this age in those early, they're like preteen years or teenagers. So that's something to keep in mind too, especially if homework is one of your battles. So oftentimes, the rule is we come home, we do homework. Well, they just sat all day, and developmentally, and so 6 to 8-year-olds, 15 to 20 minutes, we can assume that a 9, 10, 11-year-olds, 20 to 30 minutes max, but they've been sitting for large amounts of their day. So it may be that the developmental thing is what's causing the problem, not just that they're being a pain in the neck and don't want to do their homework. Completion is not as important to them as the experience. Their focus and memory is increasing, which is nice. They can use language to express their thoughts and needs. And by the time that they're 11, they can start to understand others' viewpoints and consider differences in what other people are thinking. So that's a process that starts at about 5. So 5 is when they start to understand that other people have opinions. And then, so in this time frame of 8 to 12 years, they're starting to go from, okay, other people have opinions. Now I'm going to consider them. I can at least think about it. Now that doesn't mean they'll use it in their decision making, but at least they understand it. It's interesting. So really kids don't have a real handle on the basics of time until they're somewhere between 6 and 11 years old. And you'll see, like it says, memory increase. At this age, they can start to remember, and you'll hear them talk about when they were young, and they really do have memories of things that have happened to them, and trips and things like that. They're still developing the ability to handle disappointment because they're very concrete thinkers, and concrete operations start to be able to, which is when you're integrating the brain. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, and they start to have problem solving abilities, which we all know that younger kids, if they're coached through problem solving, do have those abilities too. But at this age, you can start to see that they can do this a little bit more on their own. And they're stimuli seeking. So this is where the drama comes, right? So their brains want stimuli. They are seeking it. And that's why everything becomes the best and the worst, and there's high emotion. And that continues on into 12 and 18, 12 to 18. So puberty's still continuing. They're still having these things. You get a larger growth spurt. So for girls, their bodies change a lot between 11 and 14, and boys, it's more like 13 to 17. So that's a big change in their bodies. And you'll remember, that's like you go away one summer in middle school and everybody's like a kid, and then you come back and everyone's an adult, except sometimes you, because it happens differently for everyone. So that can be really difficult for kids, not only because they're noticing how they relate to other people, but just even like getting into their own space of who they are as a person and how that affects them and what their body feels like and how it moves. Again, there can be awkwardness, and but they're starting to gain confidence in what they can accomplish physically. And obviously they started to play sports and things like that. They can get good at things, and they have some confidence in them. So abstract thought increases, which is formal operations instead of concrete operations. And again, we'll talk about that with the brain, but they're able to think in the abstract more by this age. Finally, it doesn't have to be so clear, and they're able to recall things in their brain and make inferences and start to look at the world with a little more color, if you will. At this age, they can start to understand moral dilemmas, but understanding a moral dilemma and making the right choice in a moral dilemma are two different things. So they can understand that they can be in these situations where there are two things that may be at play, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can get there. So they have a capacity at this point to set goals, especially as you get into 16, 17, and 18. They understand what setting a goal is and trying to work towards it. And that delaying gratification just increases and increases and increases through these age. But remember, if you're talking about a 12-year-old, sometimes we expect that 12-year-old to be able to delay the gratification for a long period of time, and they're still developing that. Like it's a long, slow process. They can understand people's perspectives even better now, and understand like the social world and how it is. Sometimes at this age, they start to get into politics, or they develop a sense of trying to save the world, or they see problems in the world and they start to feel like they have some control over it. They have concern. They're more likely to take risks at this age, and that is not surprising to anyone, because they still don't have that fully formed decision-making ability. And again, we're going to talk about that when we talk about the brain, but they're limit testing. And again, if you think toddlers to teenagers, it's the same thing as a 3-year-old going to the playground and thinking that he can jump off a high, a high step down to the ground. He doesn't stop and think about it. Like, he just knows that he can do it. And with teenagers, that those same sort of things are happening. They don't have a fear, and they're not thinking through all the consequences, and so they just start doing that risky behavior. It just looks different because it could be, not doing homework, or getting in a car with someone they're not supposed to, or engaging in risky behavior sexually or with drugs and alcohol. So it's a little more serious in some ways than jumping off a high step at the playground, but it's the same thing. When you boil it down, the conformity is really important. They're developing a sense of identity that's not based on outward appearance, but at the same time, they want to fit into their peer group because that's really influential. So that in itself, like, even if you just think about how hard that is, they're finally understanding who they are as a person, and what the inside of them is becoming more and more important. I'm a person who believes in being kind. I'm a person who believes in treating everyone fairly. I'm a person who doesn't care what other people think. Oh, wait, I do care what other people think, because my developmental level is saying, no, friends are more important than anyone else, and you want to just fit in. So even just that, like, again, these are hard developmental milestones that they're dealing with. They're usually very self-conscious and just trying to, about their bodies, and especially, again, depending on how puberty is affecting them versus their peer group. Again, very intense, moody, self-involved. They're stimulus seeking. It's the best. It's the worst. When a friendship problem happens, it's all consuming. And it seems insignificant to us because we know that 2 days from now, they'll be texting each other again and it's all going to be fine. But in that moment, their brain is seeking that drama. And so it feeds it to them. And that's what their brain is supposed to be doing. So you can't sort of dismiss that. Like, that's part of it. And so you have to sort of ride it out like a roller coaster. But that's what their brains are doing for them right now. Seeking autonomy. They want to do their own thing. And this is interesting. So a lot of kids in those early school years, like 5, 6, 7, 8, even into 9 or 10, they go down in sleep. Like, they're up later. They don't need as much sleep as, the 3 and 4-year-olds. So we move their bedtime down. But actually, teenagers, the older teens, about starting at like age 13 up to 18 into their early 20s, actually need more sleep because there's a lot of brain activity happening. And we know, again, just like those toddlers who need naps, that there's a lot of activity that happens when kids are sleeping with their brains. So teenagers actually need about 9 hours. Now, I don't know any teenagers that go to bed, at 8 o'clock at night because they're getting up really super early to go to school. So they may come home and need a nap. And the good news is that a lot of teenagers will do that because they're not averse to it the way a 3-year-old is. But that's something to consider, and it's not always possible with the schedule, but on weekends and things like that, they may need a little more sleep because they really need about 9 hours a night. So, wait, I want to go here. Sorry, we'll go back. So just a few things. There's all of this new research. It's fascinating stuff. If you Google even just like teenage brain, or Dan Siegel, who a lot of us know, has a book about teenagers. It's not the best of his books, but he talks a lot about some of these things. So what we know about the teenage brain now is that there's a second burst of the neuron pruning. So remember when they're little, in those first few years, it's use it or lose it, right? All of those neurons are, anytime they get stimulus or all those experiences, the words that you say to them, the stuff that happens at school, all of that stuff is creating pathways in the brain. And that's what we know when we're little. We give them puzzles and books and all these things, and we talk nicely to them, and we we hug them, and we find all these ways to stimulate the brain, because the more that you use all of those pathways, the more you use it. If it's not getting used, it's pruned and you lose that ability. So the second burst of that happens in these teenage years. And so it's almost as much as when there's, 0 to 6, those early years, it's almost as much, or maybe even more. They're still doing all this research on this, but it's a huge time of their brains changing. So what is happening is what happened when they were little. Their decision making is a little bit driven by the amygdala. So the front of the brain, the cerebral cortex, is what adults use, hopefully, to make their decisions. That's like the thinking part of the brain, right? And but the emotions and the fight or flight and all of that is in the amygdala. And so the amygdala is driving the bus. Unless teenagers have a lot of time and a lot of information to make a decision, those decisions are being made in an emotional state. And it's only when we hardwire the emotional part of the brain to talk to that cerebral cortex, the more that we, use all those neurons, the more the brain is integrated and they can make better decisions. And this whole process is happening. So it's just like when they're toddlers. It's so amazing to me. And they didn't, like 10, 15 years ago, they didn't really know how much this was affecting it. But so the second burst peaks at age 11 for girls and 12 for boys. So it is younger than I just said. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So, and it's major road work. As they become more abstract, the frontal cortex pathways are strengthened. But again, just remembering, that if they don't have time or the information, they're just making a decision. Even if you've told them a million times, like what to do, it's still the amygdala that's doing it. So what we need to do is give them time to practice the new powers that they have, that new decision making. So giving kids a heads up a day ahead of time, giving them time to think, that's really important at this stage. And making sure that you're doing all the same things that you would do, again, with a 3-year-old who's learning how to jump off that high thing. Oh, let's take in the situation. Let's just talk about the situation. That's a high place to go from. And, have you ever jumped that high before? Like you would talk a 3-year-old through. So you can do that with teenagers too, giving them lots of information and lots of time to make decisions. Also important, because all of these changes in the brain are pretty rapid as far as this goes, and because it's a major rewire of things, this is when we start to see mental disorders like anxiety, bipolar, depression. This is one of the big things that's really, at this age, these things can start to emerge. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're mislabeled because they're teenagers. And again, we have this sort of stigma that teenagers are all problematic and all, bipolar and like all this stuff. And so you have to be aware. That doesn't mean that they're going to happen. It doesn't mean that everybody has those issues. It just means that if those things are already in the body, this is when you're likely to see those things come forward. So that's real quick through the development. And I have a couple handouts that I can post afterwards, or if you send to me, if you ask me. I have a couple of different developmental charts. That's the word I need. So in case if you need it. But it's hard to Google them. And it's very funny to me because if you Google developmental chart, 3-year-old or developmental milestones 3-year-old, you can find a nice, beautiful list and you can check things off on it. But if you start Googling like developmental chart for 12 to 18-year-olds, it's not like that clear cut. It's not like things that you can check off on a list. And there's not a lot of easily found information on it. There's articles, there's studies, there's this and that, but it's not, we just don't talk about it the same way, so it can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we know this part about the brains and that this major rewire is happening and that they have all these conflicting things going on and they want all this stuff, how do we start to inspire cooperation and connection? So first, let's talk a little bit about how we can inspire cooperation. So we have to remember that they want to be independent, and we have to encourage a problem-solving approach. The best thing is to remember that they need to practice their new powers, as we call them. So this is the perfect thing. So if you're having a struggle, ask them how they would solve it, because then they can practice what you do. Now, the trick of that is you have to let them fail, which is hard, because sometimes you know that what they say is going to fail. So I'm trying to get you out of bed in the morning and you won't get up on time and it makes us late every morning. How are we going to solve this problem? Because we have to be on time. That's the study that's here. And I don't want to yell at you every morning. So then their first answer is going to be, well, I'm just going to get up. Okay. Now your instinct is to say that's not going to work. But I think that what you have to do is let them be independent. Let them try out their new powers. Okay, so let's put a deadline on that. Let's try it for a week. You get yourself up and we leave on time. If we leave on time 4 out of those 5 days, then great. If not, then we have to go back to the drawing board, which is, again, basic problem-solving approach. Brainstorm ideas, test them, evaluate them, and then go back to the drawing board if it didn't work. So giving kids the opportunity to solve their own problems, asking questions instead of telling them what to do, showing them the bigger picture. When you're late, that affects everybody else in the house. It's also affecting your grades, blah, blah, blah. Making sure that you are trying to use natural consequences when you can. Sometimes you can't, which, like, so if you're not ready on time, I'm going to leave without you because it's not fair that your brother's late to school. Now, some parents will back you up, and I've had that happen where I explain to the parent, I need to show them, I'm going to leave that kid, I'm going to go run the kid to school, come back and get him, and then he's going to have to go to the office and whatever. Or they don't do their homework, they have to go to school and face the consequence of that. If you can do that, if you can get parents to let them use that, that's going to teach them faster than anything else. However, not all parents will do that. So then you have to you have to do your best to find a currency that works for them, whether it's more screen time or dropping them off closer to the door at school, or whatever it is that you can find to help them in the lieu of natural consequences. That's one of those times where it's good if you can find parents who you can talk to and get on the same page. Just like 3-year-olds, you're going to want to have firm routines, boundaries, and all of those things as much as you can, so that you don't have so that they have a sense of order and all of those things. And the important one from this too is understanding their priorities. So the first question is, why is it not important that you're on time? Like, what does that feel like when you don't have your homework? Why is that not important to you? Do you not care about your grades? Do you not? And then what do you care about? Like, what is important to you? Is it having extra time at the end of the day or whatever that might be? So, and choosing your battles becomes important. Just again, like a toddler, you're not going to have a fight about every little thing. Some things you have to let go. And I think that becomes even more evident as the kids get older, because sometimes the natural consequences will just take care of themselves. Like, honestly, if they don't do their homework, you know, and they don't tell you about it, they're going to suffer those consequences. When the consequences affect other people in the house, that's a little more tricky. But if it's a battle that only really affects them, then, you know, I don't try not to fight those. So then it comes back to the other important part about inspiring cooperation is connection. And I think this one's tricky for us as caregivers, because when you go into a nanny job, it's extremely easy with a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a baby, to create a connection. It's very physical world with them. You have all the tricks, you know how it is. And for some, again, because society tells us that teenagers are difficult for our whole life, you have that like in the back of your head that they're going to be difficult, but really, they're fun. They're interested in a lot of the same things that you are. And if you're not, then it's well worth your time to get interested in some of these things. Mm-hmm. So find out the cool TV shows, or the music that they listen to, or now with social media, it's, you know, knowing what an influencer is and what they follow on their social media. Follow the same people. And you'd be surprised at how many times those things can overlap. You think that they don't, but they really do. And even if they don't, it's well worth it for you to try to find that, because this age group, pop culture is supremely important to them. Like, they know all of it. And so knowing the vernacular of how to talk about that, like, so not long ago, there was this whole thing with the Visco girl, which is VSCO. And they had like this whole thing, they had this whole language, and they carried water bottles with stickers on them and all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of adults were like, I don't understand. And I was like, well, I didn't understand either. But then I just went on YouTube and I watched a bunch of videos, and then I understood. And it was funny to me. And I like got it. I like stickers on my water bottle. That's kind of fun. And, oh, they have this funny thing. They go, tss, 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 and I oops, and I oops, and I oops. And I don't know, it's nonsensical, but it's the same kind of stuff that I liked when I was a kid. So I can sort of, you know, you can't fake it, like, really, but you can at least know the language. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you have to text. They're not gonna, you know, and texting them, not just when you want something for them to do, but just texting them an emoji or a funny meme or on the weekend. And I know that it's not your working hours, and I get that, but if you're going to work with this age, you have to be a little more relaxed about some of that stuff, I think, to really put in the time. And it takes like 2 seconds, and it's fun. TikTok right now, if you're working with older kids, you should know what TikTok is. Mm-hmm. And let me just tell you that it's funny to me. You can fall into like a black hole of watching. They're like these 30-second videos, and it's an app. And it can be dangerous, so you should know about it anyway, so that you know what your kids are like seeing on it. But also, it can be super funny, and kids like spend all of this time now doing these videos that involve like weird changes of wardrobe and stop motion animation and all this stuff. And it's just TICTOC, I think, or no, TIKTOK, I think. Anyway, TikTok. And now they're all on Instagram. Most kids this age group don't even have Facebook accounts anymore. So they've moved to Instagram, they've moved to TikTok, it's Snapchat. Learn how to use these things. And I know how to use them. I don't use them a ton, but I at least know the vernacular of what they are. And then you have to do some little internal work too on yourself of saying, okay, and this is always hard part for me because I stay in jobs for a long time. So like this job, I've had my 9-year-old since she was 1. And so you forget, and you have to like take a moment and remember that now she's this whole person. And she was always a person, and I always treated her very respectfully and whatever, but taking a moment and really realizing that at this age, there's that next level of them being a fully formed human being who like has own interests and own things. She has this identity that we don't even know about, because when she goes off to school, she's this other kind of person now, and she's trying on different things and sort of figuring out who she is. So I have to respect that and let her know that I honestly want to be friends with her and that I honestly want to build our relationship. And sometimes it's just as easy as saying that, especially if you're going through a difficult period and you feel like all that you're doing is yelling at the kid or whatever. And it's probably justified. Like, I get it. It's extremely difficult, some of the periods that you go through with these kids. But then just being able to say, hey, listen, I really like you as a person, and we need to go and grab a coffee or whatever it is that you're interested in. Let's go, let's sit down by the computer and download some music that we both like and figure it out. Because I need to share something with you so that we can keep our relationship building, and it's important to me. And individual time matters, which is extremely difficult at this age because you're going to activities, they have homework, you don't have them as much of the day. And that's when it might be important every once in a while with this age group to make a date on the weekend, say, hey, let's just go see a movie. And it can be something you're interested in too. But let's just go together because we don't get enough time alone. Or even using that texting to, text them, you might be in another part of the house and they may be doing their homework, and you just text them and say, hey, do you want to take a break for 5 minutes and, play a quick game of cards or whatever it is. Let's go outside for 5 minutes and just enjoy the sunshine. So investing that time, it is well worth it. And it's just as important with the older kids as it was with your 3-year-old. Don't forget to touch them. They're not going to like it. And you might not get to have to hug them or kiss them the way that you were when they were little. But if you can grab their arm or pat them or find a way to physically touch them, that creates connection. People like to be touched, really. Even those teenagers do. They just are in their own persona of whatever. And that can be difficult. And especially, I think, especially for boys who like disappear up into their room forever, it can be hard. Oh, I'm running late. Okay. So these are hard for me. Like, don't take it personally. That's really hard because it's not personal. You just learned it's all developmental. Try not to give too much advice. Again, the worst thing for me. So they're going to come home and they're going to have a problem. And on a miracle day, they're going to tell you what it is. And your first instinct is to say, oh, when I did that, this is how I handled it. And, oh, I think you could do this and blah, 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 blah. Instead, try to just ask questions and just listen. Don't say anything. Just ask questions and then empathize. That's really hard. That must feel rotten. And then just leave it. And then eventually they'll start asking you for advice. But when you start to give advice, and it's so hard for me, it's like the worst habit I have. And develop traditions. So like like rituals and things like that. Like once a year we, go out for spaghetti dinner, or on Fridays we have dance parties, or, whatever it is, find something that you can work into the schedule. Those traditions can be important. They're never going to listen to you. They're never, it just is the way that it is. But it's okay because they're kids. So if anybody wants to type in the chat, and Tati can tell me if there are any of the, any specific problems that you're having right now that we could brainstorm some ideas, or we can unmute you if you want to talk.
Yeah. Everybody, if you text to Sue, she can't see what you're writing. So that's why you can either unmute yourself or you can type here and I will let her know.
So I'm going to just tell you a couple of my favorite ones. So my favorite one of all time was the teenager that wouldn't get ready in the morning. and her school had 2 drop-offs, the lower school drop-off and the upper school drop-off. And so to get her to come, I tried a bunch of, I asked her, how can we solve this problem? Oh, I'll set an alarm, blah, blah, blah. Didn't work. Finally, I was like, okay, well, if you're not ready by 10 after, which is the best time for us to leave, then when I take you, I'm dropping you off at the lower school and you have to walk in the upper school, even if it's raining, even if it's cold, doesn't matter. That girl was always on time from that moment forward. So we tried all of her solutions, which none of them worked. And then we went to mine and I used currency and natural consequences to sort of help her see the light. And now she's in college and she's on time to her classes. So something went right with that one. I heard somebody talking. Maybe did somebody else have one?
Yeah, we did get a question. Nargis says disrespect and lying topic. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
So lying is really difficult because, again, developmentally, it sort of fits into what they're trying to figure out, like what the right and wrong is, and that they might not be able to make that decision in the moment. A lot of times lying comes from they have this great need to, they don't want to have the consequences of their behaviors. They're afraid of being singled out or whatever. So lying is developmentally appropriate for this age. Doesn't mean you have to like it, right? So my response would be to ask them, first of all, how they think that you can solve it. Probably none of those things are going to work at that for lying, especially because, they're not, that's like a brain decision. They're thinking in the emotion, not with their front of their brain. So then the consequence for me with lying has always been, well, then I have to check on everything that you tell me. So that means when you come home and you tell me you don't have any homework, I have to email the teacher to do it. Now, you don't want to shame them. You don't want to whatever, but you want to make it clear that there's a consequence for that behavior. Mm-hmm. It's a fine line to walk with that one because you're not going to want to do like public shaming, like I have to ask in front of all of your friends if you're telling me the truth. But I think that you can find ways to check up or to check on things in a way that isn't shaming them and whatever. Disrespect is one of those sort of broken record things for me. So again, just like if a 3-year-old was whining at you and you would talk to them in a calm and clear voice and you would say, I can't hear you until you talk to me in the right voice, you can do that in a sort of grown-up way with kids. I hear that you're upset about something, but when you talk to me in this disrespectful way, it's hard for me to hear or help. Can you think of a way to ask me that question again more respectfully? I also think especially with disrespect, that's a clear one where you have to choose your battles, because if they're separating from you, that's again part of this being more independent. So there's going to be some of that because they're trying to like separate. So you might want to let some of it go if you can. And, again, you can point it out, but not make a big deal out of it. Because if you demand every single time that you're treated with respect at this age, you're going to spend a lot of time fighting that battle. So don't take it personally. Remember that it's part of the developmental part and then do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for me, but I'll let you know if she says something else. We have 2 more here. So Kelly says, how do you balance, this is a big one too, how do you balance wanting to be a confidant and telling parents something they should know?
Right. So for me, every nanny has to decide that line. And I think that ultimately you have to remember that you're the employee of the parent. So when in doubt, then you have to err on the side of telling the parents. And you have to hope that the parents understand that it's important that they don't out you because you want to build trust. But I think you have to also let a teenager know to a certain degree that that's what's going to happen. Because what you don't want to do is tell a kid, like I would never promise a kid that I'm not going to tell their parents something until I know what it is. If it's something that's self-harm, there's going to actually be physical harm, then obviously you have to. If it's to tell the parents. If it's a little more gray, I think that you can use your judgment to sort of figure out what needs to be shared right away and what you can encourage them to share. And also I think that it's important so you can tell a kid, listen, I am an agent of your parent, like I'm your parent's employee. And so I'm going to have to, if I think that you're in danger, tell your parents what's going on. I can't hide that. But there are other adults in a kid's life that don't have that same relationship. So encouraging them to find one of those adults or helping them find one of those adults who can help guide them through things might be helpful. A counselor at school, a teacher at school, another nanny friend, another adult friend of their parents, an aunt, an uncle, grandma, whoever. Because ultimately, you have to err on the side of telling parents, especially if it's something that's big. But if it's like friend troubles or school troubles that are, sort of more minor, I feel like you can coach a kid through some of those and encourage them to tell their parents. But I don't know that you have to share every little detail of that with parents. If you see the kids doing something about it. And the other way that I would also err on the side of parents with that is that if they confide in you that something's going on, but you see that they're not dealing with it, then I would say that you need to tell the parents. So they're having social issues or bullying at school and the kid's not dealing with it, well, then you can't let that go. You have to tell the parents and take some action. That's my guideline. And I think that's something that everybody has to sort of decide for themselves too, what you're comfortable and how your relationship is with your employers.
Awesome. Meg says that I told my nanny kid that I would keep confidences unless someone's safety is at stake, and that's my responsibility to speak up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So 2 more questions and then we wrap it up, guys, because we are right at the top of the hour, but I'm going to pass this along. Let's see. So Kimberly says for the younger age group, about 8 to 10, what are some ideas for when they have different rules with each parent, and in this case, divorced family?
Okay, so I think the beautiful thing about 8 to 10-year-olds is that they can understand that people have different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So here's a chance for you to kind of coach them through that. So I would start with saying, okay, everybody has different things. There's different rules at school. There's different rules at home. And there's different rules at your sports thing. And now your mom and dad have different rules in their house. And that is difficult for you, but that's how it's always really been in your life. You just didn't think about it that way. Like you probably talk back to me, but you would never do that to a teacher. So at mom's house, the rule might be this much screen time. And at dad's house, the rule might be that much screen time. So that's one way to do it. And then the other thing I would encourage them to do using questions is for them to address their parents. You as the nanny cannot say to the parents, this isn't fair, the kid has 2 different rules. That's going to be like, oh, who cares? But if you can coach the kids to address that with their parents and say, well, what do you think you might do about this? Or do you feel like you can talk to your parents? Can we have a family meeting? I could sit next to you. You could do the talking, but I could be there for you. Helping the kid address that with their parents may or may not go somewhere depending on the divorce situation. But that would be how I would address that, because that's giving them the power, or at least the opportunity, to sort of test out their ability to sort of go through that problem solving stage.
Yeah. All right. And then thank you. So the last one, how should we talk about sexuality with our teen girl, especially how can we make them sure they can tell us everything before any bad things happen?
Right. So I think you have to be honest with them. I think you have to let the parents do the heavy lifting on a lot of that. Or you have to be so dialed in with that family that you're going to speak with the same language and opinions as the parents. And I think you go from a place of medical fact, and then you can also, especially because most of us are women, you can share some of your own experiences, because that's how we learn, right? There are times I felt uncomfortable. This is a situation that happened with me. This is a time that I didn't make a smart decision, and this is what happened from it. I wish I had done it differently, sort of using your own experiences. You're building relationship then as much as you feel comfortable. And that I also think that when it comes to sexuality, a lot of times you're going to end up saying, you know, you can talk to me about this, but I would rather your parents tell you how they feel about it than me. It's not the same as giving opinions on screen time or on friend relationships. This is a next level thing. Mm-hmm. So the other thing that is important when it comes to the sexuality thing is just not flinching. Like, you can't like seize up or be nervous when you talk about that stuff. You have to get comfortable so that they come to you with it. And then, you know, you can help them get the information they need and, you know, help them go to their parents. But you're going to want to be the kind of person that, you know, even after you're not the nanny anymore, they'll come to with these things. And that, you know, then you can be more of a friend when you're not employed by the parents, and you can get into it a little bit more. But that's one of those roles where you're going to want to tread lightly, I think, because you're talking about a lot of values and morals and different things. So.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Sue. That was amazing. That was great.
Oh, well, thank you. I definitely will put the PDF. I guess I could just put it on the, where could I do it?
Is it okay, folks, email you, since we
yeah.
have
so yeah, if you
hold on, because this is gonna go on YouTube too after.
Oh, okay.
So it's gonna be public. It's up to you how much you
yes,
want to be getting emails after about a year or.
So if you're interested, you can contact INA, and INA will put you in contact with me, and I'm happy to send you I just have like I made my own developmental chart, and I have another one that I found on the internet in an article. It's not anything that you couldn't find yourself, but if you need it, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. You can send it to us, and then maybe you can find a place in the cloud when we write a blurb or something, so they can just go straight and maybe download that when they need it.
Excellent. And again, if I didn't get to something, or you ever want somebody to chew around a problem with, I'm pretty easy to find. Just Google Nannypalooza and you can eventually find me. And I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. I love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Everybody's saying thank you in the chat.
Thank you.
Yet, but thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.